And we are live, giving you a bit of some coverage of today's combat sports news and all the exciting matchups that were going on today. So, I'm going to do a two-part series on this. Actually, one that is live right now. While I'm live, I'm actually going to record a video that I'm going to upload later, of which you're going to see in video form as you're seeing this in audio. So, the first part, I'm going to talk about the combat sports news of today, meaning what are the fights that have happened today and some of the breakdowns that have happened, the storylines, the kicks and the punches. Not only that, the business side of things, and also the aspects of how people are viewing Conor Benn as somewhat of a drug cheat in the world of professional boxing, where drug use is rampant in all kinds, not just in performance enhancements and things of that nature, but also in terms of just the overall culture of secrecy that a lot of these guys live under when it comes to taking supplements that, I mean, is banned in multiple states, multiple commissions, multiple sanctioning bodies, but they continue to somehow get through it. And now they want to play this righteous game against Conor Benn because he's the one that got caught. So that is the second part of the series that I'm going to do in here. So for now, if you don't mind, I am going to video record as I'm doing an audio record of the particular matchups that have happened today. So it's going to start right about now. So this is a combat sports review for the date of September 23rd, 2023. By the way, a very interesting date considering the fact that you have 23 on both of the days. And I don't know if that signifies anything, but if you're watching the live at this particular moment right now, then you guys are watching the video portion of this, the one that I'm pointing at in the camera right now. But yes, you look at in the thumbnail, there's all these weird conspiracies about 2023 and September 23rd in particular, which is today. Now, a lot of unusual things have happened that could probably match that particular aspect of conspiracies of 23 on the day of September 23rd, 23, and what have you. So, for one, you could start off with Zhang taking on Joyce for the second time. The way that I looked at Joyce in this fight, you know who he reminds me of in the way that he fights is similar to Stipe Miocic. Very slow, very plotty, doesn't have a very good footwork, and also very slow in the way that he throws his punches and combinations. And again, saying this hurts me to say that because you really want to be respectful to the athletes that are in front of you, because guess what? There's this meme that I saw the other day that something to the effect of, well, there's 13 boxers that die every year. So you have to give respect to these guys for the entertainment that they give you. And granted, I'm absolutely in line with that ethos and way of thinking. The problem is sometimes you just really have to be honest in what you see. And what I saw out of Joe Joyce, unfortunately, was somebody that was slow, plotty, and somebody that reminded me of Stipe Miocic. The only problem was with Stipe Miocic, he can get away fighting like that in mixed martial arts because there's kicks and takedowns involved. By the way, Stipe has decent kicks, doesn't throw them often, but he has great takedowns because he was a Division II wrestler at some point of his life. So therefore, he's going to have those particular arsenals to back up the slow, plotty boxing style that he has. I'm talking about Stipe Miocic in comparison to the same way that Joe Joyce fights. And tonight, he wasn't able to get away with it because now you're dealing with a position where now you're at a 50-50 position where you're throwing shots at the same time. I'm talking about Zhang and Joe Joyce. The problem is Zhang, from just the looks of it, just looks like to be the most powerful puncher of the two. And not only the most powerful puncher of the two, somebody that had better, I guess, for lack of a better description, a harder punch than Joe Joyce. Would you agree or disagree? Obviously, I think we can all agree, considering that he's the one that knocked him out. Now, there's a lot of talks of people saying that Joe Joyce should retire and just call it quits and this and that. I think there's still other fights for him, but it has to be very, how do I say this? Uh, very very tailored to the way that he fights. What did King here say? He said Zhang versus AJ is good. Yes, it is good because AJ does have a decent footwork, but not enough to where he is able to somehow implement it throughout the whole entire fight. Whereas with Joe Joyce, he just doesn't implement it at all for the any extent of the period. So shout outs to King with that comment. And like and subscribe. Thank you for all those that are watching at the current moment of time and those that are going to be watching in the future. Don't forget to like and subscribe so I can give you some of the most epic content out there. And speaking of epic, how about the ending of Gamrot versus Fiziev? Now, you look at this picture in the beginning of the fight, you saw that Gamrot was able to get a hold of his leg in the way that he did. Ironically, later on in the fight, guess what happened? He snapped that leg only because he was able to kick him. And then I think Gamrot, with his blocking hands down, was just able to connect his elbow into the feet or into the shins of Fiziev. And by the way, this is one of the things that a lot of people don't understand and take for granted in mixed martial arts is that they take for granted the idea of just being able to kick freely, right? You look at people that kick the bags all day, they just kick it with consecutive motions, just with no problem whatsoever. The problem is, it's a lot more complicated than that because not only do you have to time these shots of when you throw the kicks, but you also have to keep aware of the elbows and the joints that are involved in the whole scenario, the bones rather, because you look at what happened with Anderson Silva and Chris Weidman, and then with Chris Weidman and Uriah Hall in the second time around, Conor McGregor and Dustin Poirier the third time around. What is the common theme there is that leg kicks are not always going to be guaranteed towards your favor, and sometimes they can be if you damage the guy enough because this is bone on bone action. So imagine an elbow going into your foot, going into your shin, and your elbow being the harder part of your bone than anything else, especially the softer part of your shins and the softer part of your feet. Hitting that, you're going to get incapacitated straight away, and that's literally what happened to Gamrot. And then tonight, you have Fabian Edwards taking on Johnny Eblen. And by the way, Johnny Eblen was able to finish Fabian Edwards somewhere in the second or third round and defended his 185 Bellator championship. Now, this isn't so much about the breakdown of the fight or the breakdown of the cards or what had happened all throughout these matchups, but rather just talking about the futuristic matchups that have come out of tonight. With Eblen, he is the 185 champion of Bellator right now, undefeated, unlike the UFC champion, Sean Strickland. So in a hypothetical world, what would happen if, let's say, Johnny Eblen was to take on Sean Strickland? How would he do? Would Sean Strickland do good against Johnny Eblen, considering that Johnny Eblen has great wrestling, great knockout power, just well-rounded? And then you have Sean Strickland, his forward pressured motion, his striking, his Philly shell, and then on top of that, his ever-evolving takedown defense that he has going on. How will that play out? Because you're in a situation where you have these multiple leagues that are separate from each other, right? You're never going to get these crossover fights. because they had a talk the other day about Francis Ngannou possibly going to UFC if, let's say, he was going to, let's say, beat Tyson Fury in the upcoming boxing match in October. The problem with that is the UFC may have a problem with allowing him to fight John Jones. And then again, as I've said plenty of times over and over again in this page and this channel, we don't know if John Jones is going to come back after the Stipe Miocic fight. And how funny is that I mentioned Stipe Miocic earlier in the way that he has the same plotty style as Joe Joyce, right? But going back to Joe Joyce, no, I'm sorry. Let me finish off with Fabian Edwards and the Eblen fight first, right? So, yeah, right now, I think you could safely say that maybe Bellator has the best 185er in the world because of the fact that, well, Sean Strickland has lost before. We've seen him get knocked out. But at the same time, it kind of shows you just how competitive the UFC roster can be. You have Pereira that is fighting for the 205 championship just after getting knocked out by none other than Israel Adesanya, then comes back and beats the guy that beat Israel Adesanya, which is none other than Jan Blachowicz. And now he comes back and fights literally who is the lineal champion of the 205 division, because he was the guy that left right before he was injured, none other than Jiri from the Czech Republic. So it is a very interesting position in this hot potato of who is better than who and who is the pound for pound number one guy. And then here you have Izzy, you know, his history with Pereira. And then here he is. He just loses to Sean Strickland. Now, Sean Strickland is the number one guy in the 185 division, but within the UFC. Now, within Bellator, it is quite obvious that there is a formidable 185 champion and a clear 185 champion, which is none other than Johnny Eblen, the guy who trains with Colby Covington or trained with Colby Covington back in his ATT days. And it's just quite funny and hilarious that, well, here we are. We're in this situation now with Fabian Edwards now losing to Johnny Eblen, and then you have this ATT guy or a former ATT guy in Colby Covington fighting his brother Leon Edwards, which is going to be a great matchup. So those are some of the interesting things that I think you can take out of this entire scenario. What did Zaska say here? He says, I think Eblen and Yarsilov are really good Bellator champs who can compete in the UFC. Yeah, 100%. This is sort of the reason why I wanted to add this particular card in this segment or this news story that I'm covering for you guys right now, because usually most times when you have a Bellator and a UFC fight in the same night, and then on top of that, you got boxing going on, it's just really easy to dismiss the Bellator cards. But for some reason, okay, to be quite honest, full disclosure, I didn't see the entire Bellator Dublin card, but I was very interested in the Johnny Eblen versus Fabian Edwards fight. For one, because I wanted to see what kind of caliber Leon Edwards is coming from going into his fight with Colby Covington. It kind of gives you a bit of some insight as to how he's going to fight that guy in the coming future, right? I'm talking about Colby Covington. And then Johnny Eblen obviously is a former training partner of Colby Covington, being an ATT guy. So that in and of itself right there, I think just brings all these different dynamics. But then you bring Sean Strickland into the mix, as I've mentioned earlier, with this hot potato that they got going on with Pereira and Israel Adesanya. And now Sean Strickland is the number 185 guy in the world, or is he? Or because he's had losses before, unlike Johnny Eblen, who just right now at this particular moment of time, whether it's Bellator level or not, just looks like the absolute dominant 185er in the world today. Whereas with Sean Strickland, you can argue and say, well, he fights in a way tougher league, which is the UFC, because obviously we know that that is the best league in the world, right? So I think it brings all these really interesting possible matchups. What do we have here? He talks about it in the Weighing In podcast. Who did? Eblen he says also trains with Sean Strickland for 10 days every training camp he does. Oh, okay. So, all right. So obviously, talking about a possible hypothetical fight with these guys, whether in terms of the fact that they come from two different organizations, and then on top of the fact they have trained together. But then again, you're talking about Sean Strickland, who sort of trains with everybody. I mean, he'll train with you. He'll go and train with me. He'll go and train with anybody because guess what? When you go in there, you're going to be in there for a scrap. You're going to be in there for a fight. And by the way, shout outs to Zeskita on that one. I'm sorry if I had mispronounced that. Let me know if I had pronounced that correctly or not. But that's interesting to know that, yeah, he talked about that at the weigh-in podcast. So that is interesting in and of itself, right? So you guys know about the action lawsuit that is going on right now with the UFC, right? Some of the most interesting things that is coming out of that is the fact that if, let's say, the fighters win on that particular class action lawsuit, what would happen is that you have fighters that are signing for short-term contracts, meaning that, let's say on one particular night, like tonight, what you have with all this conglomerate of different combat sports leagues, promotions, and different fighting disciplines, all in the same night of September 23rd, 2023, that we're being present live watching right now. And for those that are watching the pre-recording of this particular recording that I'm doing, by the way, I'm going to stay on live, but I'm also doing a recording on a separate video while I'm shooting this, because after I'm done recording that particular video that's running right now, I'm going to talk about the rampant steroid use in mixed martial arts and boxing. And tonight, obviously, Conor Benn was able to fight in Orlando. And the reason why I wanted to segue to that was because I look at the boxing heads across the pond, all the sports media people in the UK. They're very angry at Conor Benn because they believe that he should have somehow not fought tonight in the, I believe it was the Zabetta versus Hitchinson card. And then there was McCatskill, and then Sandy Ryan, who was also on the, I believe, the co-main event of that boxing card. But nonetheless, Conor Benn got in literally in the last minute to take on Rodolfo Orozco. I'm sorry if I had mispronounced his name, but yeah, Rodolfo was his opponent tonight. The 6'1", 155, 154 Mexican boxer, and moving up a weight class, on top of the fact that he was supposed to be suspended in the British Board of Commissions, but fought tonight. But I'm going to talk about that later when I'm done recording this right now, because I'm doing this right now at the 16-minute mark of the video that I'm recording to make the coverage of all the fights that had happened tonight. And I'm just going to go straight into the conventional live stream. But back to more of the fights tonight, right? With Weili, I'm sorry, I was going to call him Weili Zhang, but yeah, Zhang, the Chinese heavyweight boxer. I think he deserves a title shot at some point. Now, how will he do? We don't know, but what I can tell you is that he can be a very formidable opponent for Tyson Fury, for AJ. And by the way, the gentleman earlier had mentioned on one of the comments, he said Zhang versus AJ would be a good fight. Yeah, that would definitely be a good fight. And I was mentioning to him earlier that that fight with AJ and Zhang would be good because AJ does use his footwork at times, but then Zhang doesn't use it at all. It's almost like he just relies on his power. But then Anthony Joshua is also a power on power type of fighter. So it would be really interesting. And in considering the new profound skills that Anthony Joshua has gained training with Derek James, that would be really interesting how he comes about in that situation. So now, with the UFC, right now, let's take a look at the 155 division in UFC. Now, obviously, this has always been one of the most stacked divisions of the entire UFC roster. You have Conor McGregor, who is a legend, right? So that helps the entire division in some kind of way if you fight him, especially if you fight Michael Chandler, who, by the way, is also a former Bellator star transitioning over into UFC. You have Justin Gaethje. Then you have Dustin Poirier as one of the veterans. How about the new guys that are coming up? Sarukian. And then you got Islam on top. You got Charles Oliveira. Then you had Gamrot, who was supposed to be the next guy of some sort, right? But then he took that L against Beneil Dariush, and then there's Beneil Dariush in the mix. And in Fiziev, he's not that far away. He got a split decision or a decision against Justin Gaethje, and then he comes back, fights Gamrot in this very lackluster ending of his legs going out on him. Gamrot calling for the loser of Oliveira versus Islam. Kind of interesting. Side note, I think Gamrot is one of the luckiest fighters of all time. Always something weird going on in his fights. Yes, and that was coming from the, for those that are not watching this live right now, in the future that are watching the recording of this, Zeska was the guy that said this. But yeah, I think that's a very interesting point there, Zeska. Calling for the loser of Oliveira and Islam. Well, I'm going to make an official prediction on Oliveira and Islam right now. Maybe it'll change in the future. I'll go with Islam, right? So what does that mean? Maybe Gamrot and Oliveira. That's a great fight between Gamrot and Oliveira. And again, that's what makes this division stacked in that kind of way. Because guess what? If you were to put Oliveira and Gamrot together, would they put them in an Apex card? Write on the comments below if you think that they would put that in Apex card, or will they do that in a big pay-per-view? It just seems like all these guys are rising to such a stackness that now every single one of them are going into pay-per-view status, right? So the fact that they are going into pay-per-view status just creates even bigger money for the UFC, because who doesn't want to come see Justin Gaethje fight? Everybody always wants to see Justin Gaethje fight. Who doesn't want to see Dustin Poirier fight, especially after the Conor fight? Who doesn't want to see Conor McGregor fight? He's still the biggest star in the world. And then Michael Chandler is in that mix of that 155 rows of killers. And then obviously Tony Ferguson. Then you have Paddy Pimblett. How about the fact that they announced Paddy Pimblett going into that fight with Tony Ferguson? What is that going to do for Tony Ferguson? Because let's just face it, it may very well damage him in the worst way, but at the same time, Paddy Pimblett is not somebody that you want to trust with your picks all the time, right? He's kind of sloppy. He looks like he's just on the verge of possibly losing at some point, and then he doesn't live a very disciplined lifestyle. And then what did Zapka say here? Oliveira is the A side and only fights pay-per-views from now on. So Gamrot will get a fight on a pay-per-view. Okay, very good point right there. So again, that's the point that I'm trying to make, is that now you're inserting Gamrot as the winner tonight into a fight with Charles Oliveira. Guess what? That creates the 155 division, what you would call in a pro wrestling term, putting them over, right? Because putting somebody over is not always about, oh, well, I think my opponent is great. I think he's going to be a great matchup. I think we're going to have a hell of a fight. It's not always about that. See, what it's also about sometimes is the fact that, well, you're fighting a very famous guy like Charles Oliveira. I mean, Charles Oliveira has like millions of followers on Instagram and on his social media page, right? So that helps with something. And then he has the backing of Brazil. So Brazilians are always going to watch his fights. There's people that are in certain parts of the hardcore community that are always going to watch his fights. And then people in Europe love Charles Oliveira. So yeah, I think if Charles Oliveira was to be the loser of this upcoming fight with Islam, then yes, 100%. I think Gamrot is rightfully meant to be slid in there to take on that fight. So moving on with the other fights tonight. Now, speaking of retirement, by the way, should Joe Joyce retire? I mean, I know we're talking about him possibly taking that fight with AJ, right? But is it really an ethical matchup for AJ to take? Because what I saw tonight, Okay, what I saw tonight, I felt like AJ would absolutely batter him from pillar to post. And especially because of the fact that AJ is just very, how do I say this, meticulous now in the way that he carries himself on a technical level, which means that now you're dealing with a much more dangerous fighter, way more than Joe Joyce, by the way. Because I think with the prospect fights that Joe Joyce was fighting in the heavyweight division from, let's say, 2017, 18 from till now, I think you're in that situation now where now he's starting to feel the after effects of all these easy matchups and never being challenged along the way. You see, Tyson Fury, on the other hand, the guy has been challenged along the way. You had the likes of, let's say, um, Steve Cunningham, who challenged him early on in his career. He took on Derek Chisora when Derek Chisora was just undefeated in his early days. What do we have here? Zaska says he doesn't have to retire, but I believe his title aspirations are over. Just give him fun fights, but I highly doubt anyone will give him a shot unless then just a title defense. Just want unless then just a title defense. Okay, so I think what you're trying to say is unless just unless they want him to give him a title defense, like let's say if okay for the hypothetical reason that let's say Tyson Fury uh doesn't like him or he said something bad about Tyson Fury. Now Tyson Fury wants to give him a crack at the belt. Okay, I think that's what you mean by that. Yeah, to be in fun fights, just like with AJ, he's in fun fights right now. Would you say that AJ is sort of in that type of category in the current moment of time? Because what AJ has going on right now is just nothing but fun fights. That Hellenius fight was a fun fight. It was supposed to be the Dylan fight. It was supposed to be a fun fight. Because guess what? The champions, what are they doing? Obviously, Usyk took on Dubois, and then Tyson Fury. We know where he's at and where he's going in October. And by the way, check out the production that they're going to have on that fight. They're talking about how they had Oscar-winning designers being involved in that fight. So that's going to be really interesting to check out in that particular moment of time. So what else had happened tonight? Obviously, Hitchinson had that win tonight in the main event, which Conor Benn was a part of. So that is pretty much it for the fight nights of September 23rd, 2023. I'm going to hit the end of the recording. I'm still going to stay live. So for those of you that are watching, please stay on because I'm still going to be live. But I am going to cut off now the recording of this, and I'm going to talk about the steroid use, which is basically the main event of this entire podcast and this entire episode. We're going to talk about the ethical practices or the non-ethical practices of steroid use in combat sports and how people view it in such a negative way, but then how people really view it in such a self-righteous way. So don't forget to like and subscribe, and I will see you then. And please stay on live because this is just ending for this recording in this video, and I will see you guys soon. So now we are still on right now for the Conor Benn situation. So let's take a look at the Conor Benn situation, right? A lot of people are angry at Conor Benn because he decided to go over the British Board of Boxing Control Commissions or whatever type of acronyms they have going on there for their organization. Either way, they wanted to ban Conor Benn for coming to the Chris Eubank fight dirty, right? And so they suspended him for that long period of time. The man wants to get out there and get active. So here comes Florida. By the way, for those of you that are outside of America that don't know anything about Florida, okay, Florida is basically one of those like rogue type of states. During the pandemic, they basically told the government to go F off and go straight to you know where. And they did whatever they wanted, no COVID restrictions or anything like that. They played by their own rules. Florida is just that type of environment, that type of rebellious American nature, right? I remember I was watching this uh, YouTuber who was a former CIA agent by the name of Andrew Bustamante, and he mentioned something to the effect that, well, okay, I may have ideas that are radical or this and that, but America in and of itself is radical. No, I'm sorry, he's not the one that said this. I'm sorry, not Andrew Bustamante. It was actually Vivek, the Indian American businessman who's running for president in 2024, was the one who said this. America in and of itself is radical. And the more that you have a state that is right wing or that leans in that particular political direction, the more radical they're going to be in the certain stances that they take. Right. So, let's see here. What did he say about AJ? AJ has a fun fight, but he always got Wilder or Fury in the back pocket because AJ was a long-standing champ. AJ could lose 2 more times and he could still get a title shot since he is popular. That is a very good point right there. Now, would you say that Conor Benn is also popular, meaning that Eddie Hearn had to really jump through hoops to basically try and get Conor Benn to basically get into this short notice fight in Orlando, right? Or is it just maybe he just wanted Conor Benn in there to get some TV time? Yes, it's great for the ratings of the zone, but at the same time, it kind of gives him a bit of some dusting off of the ring rust in some kind of way, right? But I guess you could say that popular fighters do get certain special treatments. Now, is AJ popular because of the fact that he's just marketable, or is he popular because he's earned it, considering that he took on the toughest matches and even sometimes to his own detriment, right? Because AJ is all of those things. And this is the one thing that a lot of people don't want to give a credit to AJ because, let's face it, Tyson Fury is a very popular figure, and not only a popular figure, but the type of guy that a lot of people can relate to. So whenever you attack him, i.e., his possible opponents, rivals such as Anthony Joshua, Deontay Wilder, the backlash and the verbal reprisals that are going to be coming at you is going to be a storm of hail that you just can't handle because of the fact that, well, let's just face it, he has a strong fan base of people that can relate to him. I mean, let's face it. Yes, Tyson Fury is an athlete. He boxes great. He's got great movement, but the guy has an absolute dad bod. And a lot of you guys that can't fight are going to relate to a guy like that. You're like, oh, wow, you know what? He's got a dad bod, but he could fight. This is great. But you're not Tyson Fury. So therefore, his fan base is going to have a strong support. And with all this, it clouds our judgment of how to look at AJ's career. This is a guy who's brought stadium fights after stadium fights and created a huge economy for the city of London, the city of Cardiff and Wales, and wherever else that he fought at. Even in New York, the venue that he was able to generate with the Andy Ruiz fight, and then with the Saudi Arabia rematch that he had with Andy Ruiz. So yes, as a popular fighter that he is, part of it is because he has the look, he has the marketing value behind him, he has the inclusivity of what it means to be a multicultural British star in the modern day. But at the same time, what he also has is a resume to back that up. And a lot of people are never going to want to give AJ that type of credit. What did Zizeska say here? I think it's less the dad bod, but Tyson Fury likes that he seems more human. Like he struggles with depression and drug use. AJ is cool, but he is too clean cut and maybe too manufactured. So I'm glad that you brought this up, Zizeska, because you got to understand what AJ is trying to do right now. He's trying to do the absolute opposite. Don't you feel a little bit of sense of, let's say, this Hollywood Hogan-esque type of character that's emerging out of AJ when he was the AJ Mania of Hulkamania? Do you know what I mean by that? Now, if you don't know what I mean by that, there was this famous professional wrestler by the name of Hulk Hogan. Look at me talking about Hulk Hogan like as if people don't know who he is. But if I'm talking, let's say, a younger generation, maybe you don't. Hulk Hogan was one of the biggest stars in professional wrestling in the 1980s. He was the guy that slammed Andre the Giant, and he was the guy that was the American hero for the kids in the 80s and 90s and was clean cut. Everything that AJ was and everything that we had just mentioned, right? That's literally who AJ was. Okay. And then in 1996, he became a bad guy and joined this group called the NWO, which is basically like gangsters in professional wrestling. And then he started wearing black. Then Hulk Hogan started to look like this Hell's Angels biker gang leader. And then he played this whole bad boy persona after years of just playing this quote unquote manufactured outlook of things. Right. And that's kind of where AJ is at right now. AJ is sort of in this gangster phase of things where, you know what? I'm just not going to play this role of being this clean cut guy anymore. I'm going to be the hood boy from the streets of Watford. And if you guys don't know anything about Watford, England, it's a place that's got a lot of stabbings and it's ghetto and it's hood, like any place in the world that is ghetto or hood, such as Newark, Compton, Atlanta, Miami, all parts of LA, the Bay Area, Detroit, the favelas of Brazil, you name it, right? That's literally what you are dealing with when you're dealing with the environment that AJ comes from, which is why it's surprising if you knew anything about him before he was a famous world boxing star. It's like you think to yourself, how is it that this guy is this clean cut guy, right? Especially if, let's say, you grew up with him, right? Well, now he's kind of taking a bit of that turn. But I want to ask you guys this because obviously the segment of this particular topic right now is more about, let's say, the steroids of combat sports. It doesn't have to be. We can just talk about whatever. But obviously, there's this huge outcry from the British media about Conor Benn fighting tonight because he's quote unquote on steroids, because he takes drugs and he's a cheat or this and that. This is one of the things that I always talk about with combat sports and taking roids, right? Me personally, as a man myself and somebody who has competed in amateur Muay Thai and then has competed in MMA, I will tell you that I would never take steroids, no matter what. I don't care about being a legend or being a champion or this and that. None of those things matter because in the end, when you get older, guess what? It is your health that you have to worry about. And by the way, guess what? Dolph Lundgren, the guy who played Ivan Drago in Rocky and among other great films of the 80s and 90s, mentioned that he has cancer because of the fact that he has taken steroids when he was younger. So guess what? These are some of the things that you have to deal with as a consequence to your health when you take this risk of taking needles and taking certain pills that make you into this a Superman of some sort, right? But it doesn't mean that it's going to stop other guys from doing it. Why? Because guess what? You never want to walk in a gunfight with a knife. And a lot of these guys, in their minds, they know that a lot of these guys that they're competing with at the top level are taking roids. Okay? So what does that mean? That means that if you're going to go into a war zone and you know that all you have are pistols and you know that you're about to go into fighting an actual army, an actual insurgency, an actual rebel group, an actual group of viable threats against you, right? I think you're going to feel a little bit insecure and more cautious knowing that you're just going in there with handguns when you got these guys that have saw box machine guns and then M16s and then the M4s and what do you call it? I'm sorry, not M4s, MP5s. Yeah, the M4s and then the L85s, the FAMAS, and all these types of assault rifles, right? You're going to feel insecure going into a battle like that. Well, guess what? That's how a lot of these boxers feel. What is this right here? I think people complain about drug use all the time, But most people also acknowledge that every professional is probably on something. Just fans just care you don't get caught and make the sport look bad. This right here is very important to understand, because I got to tell you, right, you're spot on about that. It is really just all about getting caught or not getting caught. The guys that are getting caught, obviously, there's some sloppiness that comes into play when it comes to something like that. But then there's also an aspect of guys that have a little bit less money than the other people. Okay. And what do I mean by that? Okay. Who remembers Jarrell Miller? Why is Jarrell Miller very significant in this story? Because Jarrell Miller is undefeated. He's a very dangerous heavyweight, but nobody really talks about him, right? He's almost like this guy that was just put in the back shadow of things, right? Just somebody that is just dismissed. And by the way, if Andy Ruiz has anyone to thank in this entire world, guess who it is? It is none other than Jarrell Miller, because he was the one that was originally supposed to fight AJ in his New York debut. And it makes even more sense because guess what? The venue was in New York. Jarrell Miller is a New York guy, and Anthony Joshua felt like he could beat him. It was a great banter that they had going into the fight. You had Jarrell Miller talking about AJ's mom and this and that going into the fight. And then guess what? Lo and behold, he gets popped. Why? Because guess what? At the time, was Jarrell Miller a millionaire superstar fighter in the way that AJ was, or the way that Tyson Fury was, or the way that even Dylan White was, or what's his name? Deontay Wilder? He wasn't on that level yet. So because of the fact that he was not on that level at that particular time, it means that there was some slip ups in his methods of chemistry. Okay. In other words, he just didn't have the right enough supplements to, let's say, hide certain things, or pay enough people to do certain things to look the other way, or to, let's say, hide or mask a certain agent that is present in his body. Something that, let's say, the USADA agents or the VADA agents or the drug testing agents are trying to detect. There's none of that going on. So now, this is one of the things you have to understand. It is literally the haves and have-nots. So do you guys understand kind of where I'm going with this? Conor Benn is the son of who? And by the way, shout out to Nigel Benn. He's a very interesting human being, right? Nigel Benn, former British military, world level boxer. And why I wanted to bring that up, I thought it was very interesting because one of the things I always criticized Great Britain about was they don't have enough top guys in their fighting disciplines that are also military guys, right? And Nigel Benn happens to be that guy. He happens to be the guy that not only is a military guy, but was also a top level fighter in the world, right? So it's very interesting. And then on top of that, he's an Afro British man who is also military, but is also a world champion boxer. So he's very intriguing in that particular light. But also, because of that, it is a reason why Nigel Benn was one of the biggest stars in boxing in the 1980s and 90s. So therefore, what am I trying to say with that? The man has money. And the fact that the man has money, the man can provide certain things for his son. And when he can provide certain things for his son, guess what? A lot of that also deals with the fact that he can take masking agents to hide certain things. Okay, but why did Conor Benn get caught? You want to know why? I'll tell you why. Because the UK, I swear to you, has a very good drug testing system. I know a lot of people don't want to hear that because they just want to hear that, oh, I'm here to trash the British Board of Boxing Control because they wanted to take some livelihood away from Conor Benn. No, 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 no. I'm here to tell you the truth. I'm here to tell you the truth in the fact that there's guys that really need to take steroids because it is the best way for them to get to the top and for them to build a legacy and for them to provide for their family and also for just the protection of being in a dangerous sport. Yes, this is all true, but it's also true that the British Board of Boxing Commission is one of the best in the world. And not only that, they have some of the best healthcare systems in the world. Yes, we can argue and say that the NHS of Great Britain is not highly paid or anything to that degree, but guess what? There are people in the UK that, let's say, if they suffer an injury, let's say if they get into an accident of some sort, they can easily go into the NHS and get bandaged up and not have to pay anything. Now, imagine you're an American living in the world of private healthcare systems, right? What's going to happen to you when you're getting out of the hospital, getting bandaged up, looking like a mummy? They're going to charge you thousands and thousands of dollars because that's just what you're going to get in America. And guess what? The reason why they're charging you thousands and thousands of dollars is because 9 times out of 10, many Americans don't have insurance, right? So why am I saying that? And why is this significant to this topic of drug cheats and things of that nature? And how does it relate to the fact that the British have some of the best drug testing systems in the world? Because the one thing that I noticed about Great Britain and Europe in general, in comparison to America, is that they like to do everything by the rule book. They like to play by the rules, by the procedures, and do everything that is told of them, right? Which is why they have less resistance in mass and vaccines than, let's say, rural Americans that live in the Midwest or in the South and things of that nature. So this is something very important to understand. So yes, the reason why Conor Benn got caught with drugs in his system is for the simple fact that the British Board of Boxing Control and its healthcare system are some of the best in the world, and they don't cut any corners. Now, how about Conor McGregor not being able to fight in December of this particular year because of the fact that, well, USADA wants to save face, right? I want to pull up this comment that you had mentioned here. So right here with Zizaka. This is, I think, very significant to try to understand exactly what I'm trying to convey with this, right? I think people complain about drug use all the time, but most people also acknowledge that every professional is probably on something. Fans just care you don't get caught and make the sport look bad. Okay. So why Conor McGregor is not fighting right now? Is it bad for the bottom line of the UFC? Yeah. But guess what? Look at all the other fights that are happening. So even though Conor is not in there, they have such a machine where one guy can fill the role of the other guy, and one guy who can fill the role of 10 guys. We have 10 guys to fill those roles to compensate for that guy not being able to be there the entire year. That's the literal understanding of the UFC's market and its machine and how it runs on a yearly basis. So in other words, yes, Conor McGregor is not going to be able to fight, but it gives a great integrity to the USADA, because a lot of people are saying something to the effect, yeah, USADA, just look the other way, man. It's Conor McGregor. It's Conor McGregor. Just look the other way. Look at this comment right here that I just mentioned right now with Zizaka. What does he say here? Fans just care you don't get caught and make the sport look bad. You let Conor McGregor fight in December, guess what? You're making the sport look very bad. And by the way, shout out to Zach. I'm really glad that you are taking such a high interest in this particular topic of drug use, because obviously Conor Benn fighting tonight is not something that a lot of people want to talk about. They just want to talk about the punches and things of that nature. But I just thought that this particular aspect of this story was very interesting. So USADA is, you said here, is concerned. USADA is concerned a joke by the fans. but even they will try to avoid making noise where it is obvious they are letting Conor getting away with cheating. Yeah. So that's why they thought, you know what? We can do without Conor this year. Let's just add Alex Pereira versus Jiri. How about that? And then in the end of the year, okay, we're not going to get Conor. Guess what? Leon Edwards and Colby Covington. Why are they going to do that? Because look, you got to try to understand this, right? Managers, and you probably heard this from several different podcasts if you're an avid MMA fan, because they always talk about this, especially on the business side of things, right? Managers in mixed martial arts, I got to tell you, these guys are facilitators for the UFC and the leagues that their fighters compete for. And why do I say that? Well, for the simple fact that they have a whole roster of people that they can basically use as a leverage against the UFC or in a way to work with the UFC. So Leon Edwards is part of Paradigm Sports, which is a company that is ran by Conor McGregor, and El-Kheer, the famous Arab American Iraqi from LA, who is Conor McGregor's agent and is a big time agent in the world of sports, in the NFL, in the NHL, in the NBA, in Premier League soccer, and so on. They do all sports in Paradigm Sports Management office down in LA. They do it all. And Leon Edwards, Conor McGregor is part of that. So the UFC goes to El-Kheer and they ask him, hey, we need Conor to come in December, but we got this situation going on with USADA, so we don't know what to do. What are we going to do? So what do? They go out and they basically say, okay, I have another guy in my roster. Obviously, Leon, he's the champ right now. Let's put him in a December card. So this way, getting him to fight, it builds his name and it builds the name of the UFC and adding to the yearly or quarterly revenue of the company. Okay, and then we can just wait for Conor to come fight later on, somewhere in 2024, where he can just basically increase our quarterly in that particular segment of the year, where you just finish off this year with these cards that we've already established from here on in September all the way down to December by the end of the year. That's what they're going to do. So in turn, it goes back to this particular comment that you mentioned right here. Fans just care you don't get caught and make the sport look bad. And that is one thing that USADA is trying to do, is basically trying to save face. And this is the reality of everybody that is part of this business. They are all just trying to save face. So I think that may probably cover everything that we have talked about tonight. If there's any particular topic you'd like to bring up somewhere down the road, we will definitely take that into consideration. Please don't forget to like and subscribe to one of the most epic mixed martial arts upcoming channels on YouTube in the current moment of time. I hope you guys enjoyed the fights of tonight for September 23rd, 2023. I am going to do a reaction to that, but I probably recorded in the beginning of this particular podcast. But you will see this in video form, because what you're seeing right now is an audio form. If you guys want to see the first 26 minutes of this in video form, don't forget to hit the video section, as I have this on the live section right here. And don't forget to like and subscribe to the most epic mixed martial arts combat sports channel in the entire world. And I hope you guys enjoyed the fights tonight, because I did. All of it. Every single one of it. I was very appreciative for these types of fights that they had going on, because guess what? After tonight, there's no UFC next week, which is great, because guess what? We can all just concentrate on the Canelo versus Charlo card. And by the way, I'm probably going to make a video of that somewhere this week. I'm going to look at some fight tapes of Charlo to kind of understand exactly what it is that I'm looking at. so that I can give you guys a proper prediction and preview to that particular matchup that is highly anticipated next week. And then after that, there's another UFC Apex card. And then after that, there is another UFC Apex card or some fight night. And then there's the pay per view for UFC 294 and then UFC 295 in November, which is with John Jones, and then UFC 296, obviously with Colby Covington and Leon Edwards. But yes, all of those will be covered somewhere down the line, and all these great fights that are up ahead. Again, I'm always going to say this because it is true in this current moment of time. This is one of the best eras of combat sports. Enjoy them like we will always enjoy these fights. Inshallah.